you got to make sure you're getting into the zone of action and being proactive about it. Like that's what I always say. It's very easy to go down the rabbit hole of all the free content and come out not doing anything.
Yeah.
How do I create as much optionality in my 20s? How do I take risks? How do I learn as much as possible so that in my 30s, I can do whatever the hell I want?
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Life Outside the Mold podcast, talking all things entrepreneurship and encouraging people to step out of their own footprint and create a new lifestyle for themselves. Today, I'm sitting down with a SAAS founder, go-to-market advisor, and coach, entrepreneur, author, YouTuber, and the list goes on. He sold his software company, Toutapp, doing 7 million ARR to a company called Marketo with a $4.7 billion market cap. TK, I appreciate you sitting down with me. What's going on, man?
Hey, man. Good to see you here.
Good to see you too. So before we dive into anything, can you briefly just tell me a little bit about yourself? I know what you're working on right now. Tell me what you've been working on in the past and just kind of just your life journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been in the software industry for pretty much most of my adult life, probably childhood life as well. Started my first company called HipCal with a few of my fraternity brothers in college. And then we sold that to a company called Plaxo. Plaxo was the original social network before Facebook, so worked over there. Then I worked at Bridgewater, one of the largest hedge funds in the world. If you're familiar with Principles by Ray Dalio, so I worked over there. Then I started my own company again a software company called Toutapp. We made software for salespeople. We grew that out. We were backed by Andreessen Horowitz, one of the best VCs in the world. Sold that to a company called Marketo. And at that time, Marketo was owned by Vista, one of the best PE firms in the world. So worked at Marketo as VP of strategy. We did a 2-year transformation, and then we sold Marketo to Adobe for about $4.75 billion. And that kind of rounds out the last 15 years of me in the software industry. Mm-hmm. And I had just turned 37 at that time, and I was like, okay, what do I do next? And so I started a company called Unstoppable. And Unstoppable is a coaching and advisory firm for founders that are specifically building enterprise software companies. And we help them everywhere from the pre-revenue journey to getting to revenues, to scaling revenues, to scaling their company. We have programs for each of the stages of that journey based on my own 15 years of experience. Mm-hmm. And that's what I do now.
So you've built a lot of companies. I want to dive into Toutapp specifically and really break that apart down to like a third grade level. My first question is just walk me through your early stages. What were the initial revenue goals when you made your first hire? And then what was that hire and what was their role?
Yeah. Well, Toutapp was interesting because we started off as a bootstrapped software company. And then we realized that the market that we were going after was a very huge market opportunity. The total addressable market was rather large. So we switched from being bootstrapped to venture backed. We raised a round of angel investors, and then we went to institutional rounds.
Yeah.
And so to get to during the bootstrap phase, we probably got to about $1,000 to $2,000 of revenue per month, as we call it, MRR, monthly recurring revenue in the SaaS industry. And that was just me doing it, and I was experimenting with a few other products. And then once we raised money for it and we joined an accelerator program out in California, then I started to hire. And the first 2 hires was one was an engineer, and the second was what we called happiness officers. They were customer facing, so they were focused on customer support, customer onboarding, customer education. Those were the 2 big hires we made right after we raised our first round of capital to grow faster.
Okay, so from the point, like, how long was it just you personally before you made your first hire?
About a year. Okay. So got to, like, I let Tout run. It started as a weekend project. I built it over a weekend, and on day 3, it started making money. And then I was like, I don't know if this is big enough. And I was experimenting with some other ideas. And so I just let it run, and it just kept making more and more money, more and more users, and more feature requests. And so I did a version 2 about 6 or 8 months later, and basically did a bunch of the feature requests people were asking for, and then it started making more money. And then we started looking at the data and the type of people that were buying. People were paying $30 a month for the product. And we were like, there's clearly something here. And then as I started to talk to investors, they were like, look, you're working with 3 or 4 different ideas, but this one seems the most promising. If you double down on it, then I'll write the check. And so a year after kind of ignoring Tout, after that first weekend hackathon where I launched it, I doubled down on it and said, okay, this is a real thing. Let's go make it a real company.
Yeah. So what did Toutapp look like as a one-man show? And then how did your efficiencies and productivity grow or die as like the company grew? Did that grow inversely or directly, or?
So like version 1 was 2010. It's just me. 2011, we raised institutional capital. We raised about $350K in what we called advisory round at that time.
Okay.
And then we hired 2 people. By the end of that year, we were still at that 2 people. Probably doubled or tripled revenues that year. And then 2012, we actually got to $1 million annual recurring revenue. And that was with about 6 people. And then 2013, by end of 2013, or 2014, it blurs a little bit. We got to 3 million ARR. And that was with about 30 people. And then we got to the following year, we got to about 6 million ARR. And that was with 60 people. So we essentially triple revenues. And then we sort of hit a ceiling where we're like, oh, we can't grow as quickly as we thought. And so we had to kind of course correct.
Yeah.
And that always happens when you're going that fast. And happy to double click on that as well. But in that initial stage, it was once we took on the venture capital, the market was so strong, the product was so much in demand, we just basically kept tripling revenues and doubling our team size every year.
So how did your role start to shift from like the daily operations of like the day-to-day tasks to more so like the visionary? What was that time frame? How many people were on the team at that point, or were you always involved in the day-to-day tasks?
Yeah, I think that, I always find it funny when you meet people that have a 5-person team and they're like, oh, I'm CEO of the company. And it's like, look, dude, there's nothing to chiefly execute over.
Yeah.
And so until we had at least 15 employees, I didn't even put CEO on my business card. I just said founder.
Yeah.
And sometimes I would have like chief happiness officer, like as like, look, my job is to just make sure everyone's good.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the toughest things as a founder in the early stages, like until you get to like, 10, 20 million revenue a year, you're going to own a lot of things, and you have the combination of a maker schedule and a manager schedule.
Yeah.
A manager schedule where you have direct reports, and some of them are direct reports that are fairly junior, and some of them are direct reports that are VPs. And then you still own certain things, and you have to know how to carve out the time when you're working and when you're managing. And it's very hard to context switch between the two. And so on a Monday, if you have a 9 a.m. meeting with your executive team and then a 10 a.m. meeting with a very junior team that you still own, and you have to do a bunch of work, that's very hard for any human to do on that context switch. But that's the reality of being a founder in those early stages. And so through my journey, at least through the Toutapp journey, I owned a lot of things and I managed a lot of VPs. And so it was constantly figuring out how to context switch and structure my work week between being a manager and a maker. Later on, once we got bought by Marketo, I joined the executive team there. Marketo was north of 450 million annual recurring revenue. And I was a SVP there. And so that purely was a leader role. And so that my schedule dramatically shifted there. And it was different, not as much doing, but more managing. But in the early stages, it's definitely a combination of the two.
So when you're balancing the two, like between working and managing, what sort of strategies have you used to not burn yourself out and complexify everything? Because it's probably a lot to manage both. What sort of strategies have you used to balance both of those?
Yeah, probably 3 things come to mind. One, I had to get very intentional about how I designed my week. And so every Sunday I started to do this ritual where I would sit down and I would kind of reflect on like, where am I? Like what happened in the past week, what worked well, what didn't work well. And then what do I do next? How do I want to structure my week? What are the 3 things I want to accomplish? In fact, that practice has been so successful. We actually turned it into a online application that helps founders and entrepreneurs do this every Sunday. which is really cool. And so I started doing that. That was the first thing, like having a 30-minute Sunday ritual that kind of helped you like get level set and plan for the week in a very structured way. And I did that for like 10 years and it worked so well for me. I got others onto it and then it turned into an app. And then that allowed me to go into Monday with a plan and clear set of priorities versus kind of reacting to what others wanted me to do. And there's always going to be others trying to tell you what to do through the course of the week. You have enough people reporting to you and you lose sight of the agenda and you switch to this reactive mode. And so my whole thing was, how do I stay in a proactive mode on what actually matters versus reacting? Because everyone's going to want a whole bunch of stuff. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
That was the first thing. The second thing is, in that vein of being proactive, I try to have thematic days. There are certain days where I would be working on something that I own, what they call the maker schedule, where you're actually creating things, working on things, doing the work. And there were other days where I focused more on the managing aspect of it, the one-on-ones with my VPs, one-on-ones with my managers or my direct reports, one-on-ones with board members. And what that allowed me to do was, or like customer-facing meetings, what that allowed me to do was reduce the amount of context switching that happens on a given day. So I knew that Mondays were metrics and management days. Tuesdays were marketing days because I still own marketing. Wednesdays were customer days. And so I had themes. So I knew there wasn't as much context switching that was going on unless there was an emergency. That was the second thing that I did, having those themes. And the third thing I did was, one interesting thing that I found was, if there was, once you start getting north of 15 people, 20 people in the company reporting to you, hopefully you don't have more than 7 reporting to you, but total. If there's an empty block in your calendar, it will get full. It will get filled. If someone cancels and an empty block shows up, it will get filled. That's just one of those things that just happens. And so the third thing that I did was I started to book time in my calendar with Charlie. And Charlie doesn't exist. Charlie is my very important coworker.
Avatar.
What's that?
Avatar.
Yeah, exactly. It's just Charlie, and I'm meeting with him, and sometimes I would block out 2 hours or 3 hours, and Charlie is essentially me meeting, and so no one would bother me. They're like, "Oh, TK's in a meeting," and magically there's no emergency anymore. They can wait until next week for that meeting. But I got to actually get things done that were super important, and I could go meet with someone if I needed to, using the time I had with Charlie. And that forced me to make sure that I focused on the things that mattered the most versus reacting. And so the core theme being, don't be reactive, be proactive about your week as you're leading. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, the 30-minute Sunday practice, if you want to try it out, you can go to unstoppablesunday.com. It's like an app. You can try it out on your computer. The second was have themes for your days. And the third was block out times for yourself with Charlie or Mike or whatever you want to call that person, so that you can be effective in basically owning your time and being proactive about it.
I like how you said that with kind of developing that proactiveness, because for me, one of the hardest things, and I think it happens with a lot of people too, is just trying to consistently put together like a schedule and routine to keep yourself in line and making progress every day. So I wouldn't say it's not so much knowing like what I personally want, but it's knowing how to orient like daily individual tasks to actually move the needle like every day, and not just scatterbrain tasks and then really get nothing done.
Yeah, I think the challenge is equally true when you're just an entrepreneur trying to get from nothing to something, and when you're an entrepreneur with a team of 15 or a team of 1,000. The challenge is, what do I spend my time on?
Yeah.
And how do I make sure I get the most impactful things done? When it's just you, there's no one demanding for your time, and you are kind of on your own, and there's very little accountability. And so you can easily lose a day and like, I don't even know what I did, but I was so busy.
Yeah.
I hear this from a lot of founders who quit their jobs cold, and they're like, cool, I'm going to start a company. And magically, what used to be an 8-hour workday now got filled with all kinds of things. They still can't show anything for it. Mm-hmm. And that's because they weren't proactive about how they were going to spend their time. What are the 5 things they're going to hit this week, no matter what? The same thing happens when you have 1,000 people reporting to you or like underneath you. They are going to dictate what's on your calendar. And again, a whole week might go by you reacting, and you're not even sure what you got done. And so the key here is to go into a proactive way of approaching these things. And I find that that 30-minute Sunday practice helps you kind of switch your brain to like, cool, here are the 3 things I'm going to get done. Here's how I'm going to do it. Here's how I'm going to reconfigure my calendar. We train you how to do that. Like, here's how you like reconfigure your calendar. Let's check in on what you got done. Let's check in on your 3 priorities. And like in that 30-minute practice.
Yeah.
And that forces you, whether it's just you alone or you have 1,000 people in your organization, to be going into the week in a proactive way.
So have you found, like, when it was just you personally building these companies, like, are you a believer in like working these 15, 16-hour days, or would you say you're more proactive when you put in eight hours, but you really time block and you don't scatterbrain your tasks? And then like after that, you have more time to think and be creative versus just like kind of being in the moment with every single task.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
This is one of those things where I think that people that give advice on this do early stage entrepreneurs a disservice. I'll tell you why. There are a lot of gurus out there. They're like, it's all about, how much it's not about the hours. It's about what you really got done and having those effective hours.
Yeah.
And I do my Kundalini thing in the morning, and I do this, and I have a 4-hour day. So that's bad advice, I think. I think it's also bad advice with the hustle porn that's out there. We're like, oh, I work. Elon Musk works 90-hour weeks, so should you, to actually create something meaningful. I think that's also bad advice.
Yeah.
I think the reality of it is, here's the truth. Number one, when you are trying to create something out of nothing, it's a lot of hard work. It just is. And it's not a lot of hard work because, you're not being effective. It's not a lot of hard work because, you're not trying hard enough. And maybe that's the case for some, and that's why they won't be successful. It's a lot of hard work because you, at this point, because you're going from nothing to something, you don't know what is going to yield returns. And so you're trying a whole bunch of things. And the more things you're able to try and experiment with, the more likely that you'll actually hit on something that actually is effective.
Yeah.
And so in that stage, I worked a lot of hours. I came close to burning out. I probably gained weight. And I don't know, even knowing what I know now, I could have avoided that because I was inexperienced. I was experimenting. It was unclear. It was uncharted territory. And you just have to try a lot of things. And you wanted to pack your days with trying at as many at-bats so you get to something that like actually works. That's why I was working with 3 different projects. That's why I was working a lot of hours. And I don't know if there's a way around that.
Yeah.
I think that's the cost of entry for something that 99.9% of planet Earth is incapable of doing, which is going from nothing to something.
Yeah.
And so that's number one. However, I think that once you start to see that there is something, I think at that point, it is on you to capitalize on how to be more effective with your time versus ineffective. And, today, like, my days usually start at 11. And sometimes I'll take a client meeting right before 11. It's very rare, but I'll do that. But in the morning, I'm meditating and I'm having breakfast and I'm working out. And during that time, I'm spending a lot of time actually thinking about the strategy around my company or the clients that I work with, the founders I'm serving, or the YouTube channel that I run. And then 11 onwards is like go time on what matters. And then by 3 to 4 o'clock, I'm like, I'm good on this. I'm now going to go enjoy my evening. But really, I'm still thinking, I'm still working on things, but it's in a very different way. Why is that? It's because I kind of know what yields results. I have a weekly checklist. Here are the 80 things I need to do every week. And I know if I do these, this machine that I've built will operate successfully and my clients will be successful. And so as long as I check those off, I'm good. But in order to get to that, it was a lot of trial and error and a lot of hours to figure out, here are the 80 things that I have to do every week for this machine to work. And so I think you have to just recognize what stage you're in. And in those stages, sometimes it's about trying to eke out as many at-bats, and sometimes it's about refining and operationalizing. And you have to figure out what is right for you. And there are different seasons in life, and you have to figure out which season you're on.
Yeah. So when you were a solopreneur, what was, like, I'm sure there were a lot of long days and just like mental barriers that you were getting stuck on. What's been your key to thinking through pain points and obstacles and things you've gotten stuck on in your early stages of Toutapp or any other companies when it was just you?
Like, how did I break through challenges, you mean?
How did you, without like, did you have people in your, like when you had no one on your team and it was just you, when it's just you working on these challenges, what's working, what's not working? How did you, work with those and combat those problems just by yourself?
Yeah, I was a solo founder, and that's relatively rare in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And back then, even Y Combinator, which is the #1 startup accelerator, would not even accept solo founders. And so, and Techstars wouldn't accept solo founders. We worked with 500 startups, and I love them. And they were like, we don't care. Like, let's just do what is necessary. So from my perspective, what I did was I knew I didn't have the answers to everything, and I needed to learn. And I had to compensate for the fact that I don't have a co-founder that would keep me in check. And so I did two things. One, I always established advisors, and I was lucky enough to have some advisors early on in the Toutapp journey, and even before that, that were smart people that I trusted, and I would talk to them regularly. That's one. There were like advisors / coaches that just helped me. And this is why I'm in the coaching business now, because I got so much value from those type of relationships from someone that's kind of been around the curve before. The second thing I did is I made sure that I created a mastermind and attended a mastermind of other founders that were at the same level as I am or ahead. And that helped me keep me accountable. I'm like, okay, if these guys are moving fast, I got to move fast. So let's make sure this works. So that was the second thing. And the third is, for any area of the startup that I need to go figure out, I would buy the top 10 most rated books on Amazon and just go do it. Like I would jump right into it and make it and like read it and figure out how to make it work.
And almost use that 2-hour time block that you were saying every day to like, is that something that you would?
That one, like back then I wasn't as sophisticated when I was starting out. So I would try to do it whenever I could. But other times, Yes, it wasn't so much the 2-hour thing. Like I just made sure to read those books. And at that point, like I had a lot of time to myself because I had nothing that like, I was like, I got to make this work. And so I read the top 10 marketing books. I read the top 10 sales books. And I always try to find books that were like source materials, not the latest business books, but like the old school marketing books and the old school sales books, because they are the principles. Like if it worked 50 years ago, it still works now. Those are the truest principles, because if people are still talking about that book now, it means they're true principles. And so I always focused on those kind of things, and that helped me focus on, hey, here's how we get to the right set of principles on each of these areas. That triangulated with the right coaches and mentors allowed me to break through and really get to the results that I needed.
So you would say, like, to someone who's just getting started, to create and utilize those relationships through social media, or like really anything to be able to not go through everything yourself and be able to call up upon people, see what other speeds people are going at, what they're doing every week, and like really break it down to a T of like accountability and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, I think like one is accountability. Like, how do you spend your time and how do you be proactive about it? Like, have a game plan around that to break through. I think the second one is we actually have more free content ever, like in the world, than ever before. But free content doesn't yield clarity, and so I didn't want to just Google everything. What I wanted to do was get the source materials and then go talk to the people that really knew what they were doing, and then get to an answer. And that I found to be more effective. Otherwise, like we run one of the fastest growing YouTube channels for building software companies. And we do about 14 million minutes watched every week right now.
Wow.
And yet, even though I give so much free content, people still join my coaching programs. Why? They're like, look, I can watch the free content all day long. I want a framework to follow. And then I want to be able to ask you, like, is this right or wrong? And those are the people that get faster success, because the other people, they feel like they're getting work done by watching a YouTube video and learning some principles versus doing the work. And there's a difference there. So I think there's more free information now than ever before. But what's important is you're taking action. And the way you take action is you either force yourself to and you're doing the right thing, or you get mentors that kind of can look at your work and say like, yeah, this is right or wrong. So you got to make sure you're getting into the zone of action and being proactive about it. Like that's what I always say. It's very easy to go down the rabbit hole of all the free content and come out not doing anything.
Yeah. In terms of like personal identity and self-awareness, when you talked about when you sell your company, you sell your purpose. You said this with Toutapp. You're on the gas pedal all these years trying to grow the company. And then you get to a point where it all comes to an end. Explain what that means and kind of how you coped or combated with that.
Yeah, I mean, like it is pretty simple. Like if you're an entrepreneur and you're growing a company, you wake up in the morning and you may have gratitude for your family, and you should have that. You may have gratitude for your friends and your life. Your identity tends to be tied up in the company. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but that's kind of reality, because this is like your baby, like you birthed it and you made it a thing. When you sell it, all of a sudden that next morning you wake up and it's not like Toutapp, it's now Toutapp and Marketo, and it's more Marketo. When we sold Marketo, the next morning it was like not Marketo, but I'm like, Adobe. And it's like, it's different because you didn't birth it, even though you love it just as much. I really enjoyed my journey at Marketo, but I wasn't the co-founder of Marketo. The co-founders of Marketo were incredibly smart people, even more smarter than I am. But I really respected what they created. And so I loved my time there, but it wasn't the same as the company that I started and once I sold it to them, that morning wasn't about how do I make Tout as big as possible. I had to re-sign up to this new journey of how do I make Marketo as big as possible. And so that shift, what you don't realize is even though you're selling your company and getting the money, what you don't realize is you're also selling your purpose in a sense. You're selling a part of your identity. You're no longer CEO of Toutapp. You're no longer founder of Toutapp. You're now as VP of strategy at Marketo. And I started a company called Toutapp, but we sold it to Marketo. It's like different. And so you tend to ask yourself, and entrepreneurs are like this, especially the serial entrepreneurs, that like, why do they go do it again? It's because they have more experience and they want to go after a bigger scale, but also because it gives them a sense of fulfillment, and because you created something and that's part of you and becomes part of your identity. It shouldn't be your entire identity, and that's something you learn along the way, but it is a big part of your identity. And I think that's one of the things a lot of founders, when they sell their company, don't realize. And then they'll go spend a bunch of money and then they're like, I'm still not fulfilled. Like I got to go create another thing that really gets me up and running in the morning. And that's something you don't realize, and not always is baked into the price of selling the company.
Yeah. Love that. I want to get your perspective around using your 20s to get ahead in life rather than putting yourself on this financially reliable hamster wheel. I know you talk about most people try to save money, buy a house, a car, have kids. Your perspective is kind of the opposite of that. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. The standard perspective is check off the list, get a college education, get into a really solid marriage, have kids, get the house, get the car, and then keep doing what you're doing, right? And invest. The thing about that is it's designed where every single one of those things you check off, you're actually increasing your burn rate in your 20s. And so if you're increasing your burn rate, you're also trying to figure out how you can predictably increase your income rate.
And by burn rate, you mean financial burn rate?
Your financial burn rate, right? Yeah, your own personal life burn rate. And that's one of the things that you don't think about. You're like, well, what is my personal burn rate?
Yeah.
You think about your company burn rate, but not your personal burn rate.
Yeah.
And so that is essentially setting you up. So by the time you're 30s, your burn rate is so high, and you kept making these micro optimizations in your career to make a little bit more money and get that promotion. You're not stuck in this hamster wheel of life where you just got to keep it going so you can keep it going. And that's the worst thing to do in your 20s, because you're making micro optimizations. The best thing to do in your 20s is to figure out how you can actually keep your burn rate low. Therefore, you can take more risks and learn more. If you can do that, then what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to learn specific skills and take risks and get outsized rewards in your 20s, which will then allow you to live however you want in your 30s. And that's a wildly different way to do it, because now you're not checking off a checklist that you're expected to do. Because guess what? 50% of them end in divorce, right? And a lot of people check off all the items that they were supposed to do, and then they get to the top of the mountain, and then they're like, there was supposed to be a kaboom. Where's the kaboom? Exactly. And you're like, I don't know. You don't reach that fulfillment, even though you checked off that list that society gave you. And again, it goes back to that whole reactive, proactive thing. And so checking off the checklist is a reactive thing. A proactive thing is like, hey, how do I create as much optionality in my 20s? How do I take risks? How do I learn as much as possible so that in my 30s, I can do whatever the hell I want? And that's, I think, how I tried to approach it. I don't think I did it as well. Now looking back, I should have done it better. But that's the hindsight is 2020. But still, I got to a point where I get to spend most of my 30s, and I'm going into my 40s now, doing whatever I want. And I'm thankful for that, because I worked really hard in my 20s and took those risks and really got the rewards. And therefore, I was able to do even bigger things and have the optionality to do the things that I want. And that journey wasn't straight. I wasn't like this guy that was like, oh, I totally can see how, you know, you have to create optionality. I learned the hard way as I was going through my trends. I'm like, this is not it. I'm checking off the boxes. It's not bringing me happiness. I got to make a change. And then when I did, I found the fulfillment that I wanted.
I think where that comes from too is also like, you're working hard all these years in school, and it's like, all right, high school, then college, like after college, now I'm finally set. And so I think that's where this kind of traditional pull of just buy a house, get married, do all this, spend all this money kind of thing comes from, is like, okay, you've achieved it. Like you've graduated from the school, like you're set. But it's like in reality, like that's kind of, I mean, I think you would agree with this. It's kind of just where you're starting. Like you haven't really done anything when you graduated school. So it's like you were saying about with like watching YouTube. Like you can watch so many hours of YouTube, but if you don't really execute on anything, you never really did anything.
Yeah. You know, the thing I've learned in life, and I've learned to respect, is entrepreneurship is not for everyone. And so some people, I think, will be perfectly happy checking off the boxes and increasing the burn rate. They'll be at a level of happy that maybe others will find unhappy. But they themselves will be like, you know what? I'm just really happy. I get paid and I get to watch football and I get to watch Netflix with my kids and I'm good. Yeah. And that's okay. And I think that system works well for them. I think there are others that are like, this is not okay. I need way more. And I have a bigger vision for my life. And the mistake that happens is they think they can do what the average person does and get outsized returns. And that's where they go wrong. Yeah. And so the question is, do you want to be average or do you want outsized returns? If you want outsized returns, then minimize your burn rate, increase the level of risk so you get those outsized returns and you can go after that bigger vision you have for your life. If you don't want any of those things, then just do what everyone else is doing. And that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it. Yeah. You just, the problem, unhappiness comes and all this stuff that happens where people are complaining like it's unfair and unjust and this and that. Yeah. What they're really complaining about is they want to put in average effort and get outsized returns. And they're complaining, why am I not getting outsized returns? Because you're putting in average efforts. If you put in, you're not willing to do what it takes to get those outsized returns that others get. If you're willing to do that and you did that, you would get it. And that's where I think the mistake happens. I don't think there's anything wrong with checking off the boxes and doing the things that you're doing. I think that's perfectly fine if it fulfills you and makes you happy and that's the life you want. There's a lot of people that want more. And I think they just have to be recognize what the cost of entry is to get that more out of life.
I love that. Yeah. Guys, so TK also has a book, How to Punch the Sunday Jitters in the Face. You can find it on Amazon and you can go to tkcater.com, find more about TK. I'll also leave a link in the description below. But dude, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this today.
If people want, man. These were great questions.
Thank you. I appreciate that. If people want to find more about you, where can they find you?
Just go to tkcater.com. That's a great place to just learn about me. I'm also on YouTube. That's a great place as well to go to tkcater.com/YouTube. And those are the two best places just to learn about Unstoppable, which is what I work on now. And our whole mission is to help startup founders and entrepreneurs become unstoppable, both in their life and their business with an unstoppable strategy.
Awesome. Appreciate it, TK.
Thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.